Walker with the right hand gets all the way to Root. And slams it home.
We got a bunch of dogs on this side. We're willing to fight for 40 minutes.
And the Owls will hold on and win the Little East Conference Championship.
Oh boy, what a game!
Welcome to Owls Overtime. It's Friday, March 8th, and I'm your host, Tom Rogers. It's the show where we talk everything KSC sports. Will the Owls dance continue? It's a big night coming up for the Owls. The basketball team plays in the Sweet 16 at 7 tonight against Guilford. If you ask today's guest, sports editor for the Keene Sentinel, Mike Mcmahon, he thinks we should be hosting this Sweet 16 matchup. We talk about that and more coming up, but first, let's recap what happened this week for all the Owls teams. Let's start with baseball, who dropped a game on Saturday and split their doubleheader on Sunday. Tommy Ehlers combined for 8 RBIs over the weekend. 2 weeks in a row now, freshman pitcher Cam Thomas has been honored as LEC Rookie of the Week. Thomas threw 5 innings, allowing 2 runs and picking up his first career win. The baseball team sits at 500 with a 3-3 record. The record books at KSC have gotten quite the workout this year, and continuing to add to history here at Keene State is the women's lacrosse team, who has opened up the season 3-0 for the first time in program history. Well, it's been a different story for the men's lacrosse team. After picking up their first win last Friday, the Owls dropped their 5th game of the season to Bates on Wednesday in an 8-6 defeat. It seems like just yesterday I had on coach of the esports team Noah Druin, and the season's already nearing its end. Due to some forfeits by other schools, the current record for esports is 6-11, but Rocket League has done most of the heavy lifting for that record. Overwatch 2 did pick up its first victory on Tuesday, and Super Smash Bros. Technically has a win now, but that comes with an asterisk, if you ask me. Well, that does it so far this week. The baseball team is currently playing Middlebury, where they're down 4-1 in the top of the 4th. Now, here's my interview with sports editor for the Sentinel, Mike Mcmahon. Here we go. All right, I now welcome on to Owls Overtime sports editor for the Keene Sentinel, Mike Mcmahon. Mike, thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
So you're my first guest to not either be a KSC student or work for KSC, and usually the first question I ask people is what their road to Keene State story is. In your case, it'd be the road to Keene Sentinel story. I know you'd worked here in the past. You had a stint at Nesson. What has led you to becoming sports editor at the Keene Sentinel?
Oh man, it's a good question because it's I was actually just thinking about it the other day. I had one of those like Facebook memory things pop up where it was 10 years since I got like my first official like not college newspaper or like my own blog like writing position. And so it was kind of crazy because I was kind of looking back and I was like, wow, it really has been 10 years since I kind of started this journey. So yeah, for me, I mean, like you said, I was at Keene once already. And so, I mean, I guess we'll go all the way back to the beginning. When I was in high school, I was an athlete. I played sports and, kind of you have that realization when you're like 17 that you're not going to be a professional athlete, right? But I always still wanted to be involved in sports. I was so involved in, the high school sports community where I grew up, and, my dad had coached high school baseball for so many years. And so I always had this like affinity for the local high school sports scene. Now, obviously when I started writing, and the initial goal was, you want to be the next Bill Simmons, right? You want to be the next big name and national, whatever. So that kind of was the pursuit for a little bit. And I went to college at Suffolk University in Boston, which was just an awesome experience. And I wanted to be in Boston simply because I wanted to be writing about Boston sports teams. That's what I grew up loving. I had the passion for it and all of that. And from there, while I was at Suffolk, I was fortunate enough to, be surrounded by a ton of talent. Suffolk isn't, particularly with those Boston schools, I feel like Suffolk doesn't get a lot of credit for having a big journalism program, right?
Sure.
But when I was there, I was surrounded by so much talent. Like so many of the kids I went to Suffolk with just went on to do incredible things. And so, I kind of had this, motivating force around me with all this talent. And it led to me getting a co-op at the Boston Globe where I covered high school sports. And that was kind of my first real taste of covering sports on deadline, getting involved in feature stories and doing that stuff. And I had some great mentors there. And so really that's where the love for it started. So, over the course of the years, I did all sorts of different things, My first writing job that I brought up was I was an NHL blogger for Sports Illustrated back when they were like an established, website, and they had actual writers, not robots, writing articles and stuff like that. But basically my job there was I would just watch hockey for like 7 hours a night. They hooked me up with like a Game Center account. I would watch just games from first puck drop all the way to the end of the West Coast games, and I would just write blogs.
Doesn't sound bad.
No, it was it was an awesome gig. In my little tiny Boston apartment, in like my studio apartment, just like ordering Chinese food and just watching hockey all night. It was the best. It was the best.
Sounds dangerous too.
Incredibly dangerous, yes. But so that was the start 10 years ago. It was doing that and covering high school sports as a college student for the Boston Globe, and the push was still there to cover pro sports and stuff like that. I hung out into that like initial dream of like, I think this is what I want to do. I want to be a beat writer. I want to be a columnist at a major newspaper writing about national sports. And so after I graduated college, I went a little bit without a job. I was living in Connecticut. I was driving up to Boston on the weekends and sleeping on my friends' floors to cover sports for the Boston Globe as like a freelancer, a stringer, and stuff like that. And then I finally got the job for the first time at the Keene Sentinel, and that was end of 2016. And so I was here for 2 years. It was great. It was one of those things where it was my first official full-time job out of college. And so, you kind of come into it being like, okay, well, it's a stepping stone, right? I'll be here for a couple years. I'll establish myself. I'll work on some skills, and I'll move on to the next thing. And that's exactly what it ended up being. I think I was at the Sentinel for like almost 2 years to the day. And then I got a job offer at NESN, New England Sports Network, as a digital content producer. And that was the opportunity that I had kind of been waiting for. It was here's your shot to go cover pro teams in Boston. This is when you set out to do this journey. This is what you wanted to do, right? So I went to NESN. I was there for a year. It was a whirlwind of an experience, right? I got to do all of these amazing, cool things. I covered the Boston Bruins Stanley Cup run in 2019. I was at TD Garden for every home game. I was in the locker room after the Game 7 loss to the Blues. Like, you have all these crazy moments, brushing shoulders with Tom. You're walking by Tom Brady in the Patriots locker room after practice and stuff like that. It's all these like pinch yourself moments, right?
Whoa.
But what I came to realize, and the Boston and the national sports media, it's such an echo chamber, and it's such a grind. Like, everybody works so hard, but to make wavelengths and to kind of like, it's a drop in the lake, right? What you're doing, the work you're doing. So
because they have so many people doing that,
exactly,
that are just as passionate and love that sport, or those sports like you.
Well, and there's just so much to take in, right? You know what I mean? Like, there's so many websites you can go on to read about Boston sports, national, and so many people are saying the same things, and they're just trying to say it louder than the other. So the experience was amazing. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. The work, I found myself a little burnt out a little bit, like pretty quickly. So anyway, I ended up finding myself without work in 2020, which is kind of where I had this internal, a year of just kind of figuring out what do I want to do next, right? Do I want to stay in journalism? Do I want to try something else? Because I had this kind of realization of, man, maybe this initial dream isn't what I kind of thought it was, right? Maybe the work wasn't as fulfilling as I thought it was going to be. What do I want to do next? And so 2020, during the pandemic and everything, really ended up being this internal year of kind of thinking it through. And I got back into, once sports started back up, I got back into covering high school sports for the Boston Globe. And I was like, this is it. This is what I love doing, right? It was kind of back to the beginning. And from there, I was working a full-time job, not in journalism, and writing wherever I could. And then I just happened to get a phone call on Christmas. I was down in my parents' place in Florida. I got a call from somebody that I knew from the Keene Sentinel, and the sports spot had opened back up. And I just saw this opportunity to come back, and it was like, here's my chance to go back and do something that I loved doing before, and kind of now have more of of my own control in it, have, more of an idea of where I want to do, what I want to do with it, kind of a more bigger picture thing. So that was the really long version of the story,
Sure.
right? I gave you every little detail there. But yeah, that's how I ended up back in Keene. And I will say, like, I have such a better appreciation of this place and the paper that I work at 5 years later, right? You know what I mean? The last 5 years really helped kind of solidify in my mind what I want to do, who I want to be, and the kind of writer and reporter and the kind of work I want to do, right? And Keene is a great place, and the Sentinel's a great place to make that happen. And covering, Keene State's got a great athletic community here, the greater community in general. There are so many great people around here, right? And so I've really loved being able to come back and kind of really sink my teeth into telling people stories here, knowing that this isn't just a quick stop, right?
Sure.
That was probably almost too much, but that's the story.
Well, no, I mean, you answered kind of one of the questions I had coming up, which, I mean, it seemed like you did have quite the workload at Nesson. You were cranking out like 8 to 10 articles a day or something. That's crazy.
Yeah, honestly, in some days that was like the bare minimum, right? If it was an 8-hour shift, you're looking at least getting out 1 article a day. If there are days where it's busier, where you're doing a lot more to that. I will say, though, when they're called articles, right? But it's an aggregation site. So, I'm taking something that is behind a paywall on bostonglobe.com, right? The big feature interview with Alex Cora or something like that. And they touch on a million different topics in one Boston Globe article. Well, I'm going to dissect that. I'm going to turn it into 7, right? So that was the kind of work that you were doing.
Now, something that did catch my eye was that, I've got a sports podcast right now. Correct me if I'm wrong. Were you the creator or producer of the Nesson College Hockey podcast?
I wasn't so much the they wanted to kind of find a way to have more college hockey content on the Nesson site, because Nesson had this partnership with Hockey East, and they were looking for ways to establish more content and kind of help promote our coverage of the sport. And one of the ideas was starting a podcast. And Nesson has a ton of podcasts. And
right.
I really wanted to be on one of them, but they all kind of had their solidified crew. Like the same people had been doing the Bruins podcast for a couple of years. Same people had been doing the Red Sox, the Patriots. It was all kind of established. So I was going, well, how can I get into this, right? And so that was kind of the opportunity. And that was a lot of fun, starting that up with Dakota Randall. And it was really bare bones at first, but it was cool to do interviews, and I got to meet coaches, and it was really cool. And I remember specifically at the time, Jeremy Swayman was an up-and-coming goalie for Maine. Well, he was the goalie at Maine, and he was having a tremendous season.
Yep.
But he was like a late-round draft pick of the Bruins. He wasn't really he was like a prospect, but he wasn't like the goalie prospect yet.
Yep.
And I just remember doing that podcast, and he just had an unbelievable season at Maine that year, and being like, wow, maybe the Swayman kid might turn out to be pretty decent, right? I think that ended up being a correct take, right?
Yeah.
So the college hockey podcast was really cool. It was something that I really enjoyed doing for the few episodes I got to do there.
Awesome. Jumping forward today, it seems like you've covered about every sport a school could offer. Is that the case covering Keene State athletics?
Yeah, with Keene State, we tend to focus on the big programs, right? That
men's basketball.
Yeah, men's basketball,
swimming, diving, probably.
Yeah, a little bit. It's really it's the sports that most extend beyond the campus here.
Sure.
That we tend to focus on. I mean, we touch on all of it. When people win postseason awards and stuff like that, we'll certainly.
Right.
But in terms of what I'm trying to do a lot of reporting on and coverage on, it's what's drawing the most interest, not just at the college but at the community. So yeah, men's and women's basketball probably leads the front there.
Makes sense.
Men's lacrosse, baseball, some of those other sports that I get asked the most about, at least. When I'm out and about town and people ask me about Keene State sports, obviously it's the basketball teams first. But then it's baseball, men's lacrosse, sometimes the soccer teams and stuff like that.
Well, it's a great time to be reporting for any of the local sports in Keene or surrounding areas. I know you get to do a variety of schools, Monadnock, what have you, all of them. But this is a Keene State sports podcast. So what have been some highlights covering the athletics of KSC for you?
Oh, man. Well, I will say in coming back, I was my first 2 years at the Sentinel, I had established a relationship with Ryan Kane and the players back then, and they had a great run the first time I was here. They went to an Elite Eight. I got to watch Ty Nichols, kind of solidify himself, and then he went on after I had left. He went on to set the scoring record. So I had a really good relationship with Keene State basketball when I left, and I remember coming back. One of the first things I did, because I still relatively followed, but I wasn't sure if Ryan was still the head coach here and stuff like that. I remember it was one of the first things I did was, I was like texting people, and I texted Ryan that I was coming back, and it was just so cool, right? I've had so much fun covering that basketball team. The basketball program here does such a great job. Well, all the sports, like the whole sports community, like Abe Oshiak does an amazing job.
Shout out Abe.
Yeah.
Shout out Abe.
Yeah.
I can't wait to have him on soon. I've had Marty on, so he's due for an episode.
Definitely. He has been so tremendous at giving me whatever kind of access I've wanted and have requested, and we have a great relationship. And so I have to give him a shout out because it's really made covering the sports here a lot more fun. And I know that the college didn't always have the best relationship with the paper. When you go back, 10 or so years, I don't know all the details there, but, I think it's pretty safe to say there used to be some more stressful moments, and the coverage the access wasn't always there. Let's just put it that way. And
sure,
it couldn't be better now. Dave Hastings has been outstanding. The players are outstanding. So it's really been great because, I really feel like if I ever have an idea, they're game for it. If I ever want to do a story, they're game for it. So yeah, it's been tremendous. And it is really that way with everybody I've interacted with over here. I've never really run into any kind of roadblocks, right, at Keene State. So, I think the college has done a tremendous job of promoting itself and working with the people who want to get in and write about the things going on here.
You mentioned Coach Kane. You mentioned Coach Hastings. I do want to talk a little more about them later, but on Monday you released an article I couldn't have agreed with more, where you stated your case as to why you think Keene should have hosted another round of the NCAA tournament. So real quickly, if you could, for those that might not have read your article, would you mind just presenting your case here on the podcast for why you think Keene should have hosted again?
Absolutely. And if you want to read that, you could head to sentinelsource.com, of course.
Absolutely.
Just getting that little promo in there, right?
Oh, there'll be time for you to plug at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I got really into the weeds on Division III basketball.
I could tell when I was reading that. I didn't know half the stuff until I read it.
Yeah, I was going back and forth with, the D3 Hoops people on Twitter and stuff like that. And listen, I get that it's a complex system and, the numbers that go into it and stuff like that. I get the credentials and criteria for why it ended up at Guilford. I disagree with, not even disagree is maybe even a little strong. I think that there's a better way to maybe do it, and I think that there's some factors that they don't consider that they should consider when they think about who should host a second weekend pod. And I think first and foremost is attendance, right? If the NCAA is about money, which it's undeniable that money plays a huge role in this thing, right? Well, Keene State brought in a ton of gate money from their attendance last weekend, right? And it was going to be that, if not more, if they hosted a second weekend, right? They outdrew Guilford by, I think, double, right? I think attendance, I think capacity for a basketball game at Keene State is about 1,300. That's almost twice what Guilford drew. So when you're looking at, what kind of an atmosphere do we want to have a Sweet 16 and Elite 8 game be in?
It's Spalding Gym.
It's Spalding Gym. It's this community. There's so much more. There's so much more basketball to go watch in North Carolina, right? You go to a UNC game right down the road in Durham, go to Duke, literally there's so much college hoops down there, right? This is the center of it in New Hampshire, in arguably in Western New England, right? Outside of some of those D3 schools in Boston, which Keene State draws better than, because this is the draw in Keene. This is what, if you're into sports, if you like watching, going to sports, you're going to a Keene State men's basketball game in Keene, right? So, yeah, it was frustrating because I think this is the best chance Keene State's had in this run here that they've been on the last 8 years since Kane started and now moving on to Hastings. I think this is the best shot that they've had to get to a Final Four, and I just think it would have been really nice that even if they fall short of going to the Final Four, having a send-off at Spalding, right? You know, having the last game at Spalding be the last game, right? Whether it's either end of the season or they're going to the Final Four. I kind of thought that this team deserved that kind of right. I thought they had earned that right. So that was the big thing behind it. I understand why it worked out the way it did. You know, like I get the people on Twitter were like, "Oh, you know, worked out this way because of this." And I'm like, "Yeah, I understand it. It just like, but like, can we not challenge it at all? You know, can we not have a discussion on how can this be better?" And I failed to accept the money thing is the money thing and it is the way it is. Well, it is the way it is not good enough for me. So that was my frustration, which led me to write the article, which, I got into all sorts of numbers. I looked up like all the attendance numbers from all the hosts from the NCAA tournament. Like
you put in the work on that one.
I was deep in the weeds, man. I was like 2:00 in the morning and I'm like, what was the attendance at Oswego State this weekend? And it was just crazy. I was going nuts. So that was a lot of fun. I've gotten some good feedback on it. I'm glad that people tend to agree with me there. And well, hopefully, you know, they go and prove that it should have been in Keene this weekend.
Well, luckily, another successful season for the men's basketball team. You got the 3-peat LEC championship. They're still in the NCAA tournament. All of this in a year of transition. We're going from Coach Keene to Coach Hastings. I think it'd be interesting to get your perspective, whether it's from an analytical standpoint, you know, the way they coach, game plan, et cetera, or even just personality standpoint, what differences you've observed between Coach Keene and Coach Hastings?
Oh, it's a good question. And, you know, Coach Keene, from like the very first time I ever interviewed him, kind of struck me as here's a guy on his way up the ladder. You know, he just the way he talked and the way he answered questions and presented himself as a head coach. I was just like, here's a coaching prospect, right? And it was one of those things that when I left, I was like, the first 2 years I was covering the team, I said, wow, Kane's probably not going to be here very long, right? And it was almost like it's only a matter of time before the rumors start popping up and stuff like that. So, you know, him and Dave they're two very different coaches. They're two different people. You know, Dave obviously comes from a military background, a career in the police department. He's very disciplined. Not that Keene wasn't, but there is a little bit of difference there. I will say that they're both so good about promoting their players and promoting their team, more so than just like as basketball players, but like as people, right? And the whole thing that they've always talked about, like a player-driven culture, they're both so behind that. And I really think that, you know, when Ryan left, it was not that much of a surprise, right? Because it was kind of always going to be a matter of time. But when the decision came to pick a coach, I just remember thinking like it was a no-brainer. Like if you want to continue the success, not just on the court, but in terms of a program culture, that Dave was the guy that had to take over. So because it really was, everything on that program just seems really in sync at the moment, and it has for the last, you know, since I got back last January, and so yeah, I mean, there's obviously differences. I'm not there on the day-to-day. I don't really know what goes on behind closed doors and stuff like that. So I'm sure there's differences. I'm sure, you know, Jeff or Octavio could you know, tell you differences, but on the things, big picture wise, on the things that we see, and in terms of goals and how the program wants to hold itself, really in line, the two of them, from what I've found.
Well, that makes sense considering just how successful they've continued to be. So another change that happened staff-wise at Keene State was over the summer, we made Marty Testo the athletic director. Have you gotten to have many interactions with him? How have those been?
I've had a bunch of interactions with Marty. And they're always great. Marty's awesome.
Marty's
right?
awesome. There's a reason he's been on the show twice.
Yeah, exactly. He's great. I did the Sentinel Sources interview with him, and that was a ton of fun. I loved talking about what video games he liked to play and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah, when he was talking about esports, and he was like, well, you know, I grew up with Frogger.
Right,
He loves to bring up that he played Frogger.
Yeah, hey, it's a great game, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I am still, Noah, if you're listening to this, Coach Druin, I have 4 years of eligibility left. If you guys want to add like MVP Baseball 2005 to the fold, I'm available. Just reach out, let me know. Let's make it happen.
Well, he's been on. I'll get him back on, and I'll bring it up.
Yeah,
we'll see what he says about it.
And I can't wait to do more with the esports program and kind of find out what's going on over there. But anyway, to back to your question, to Marty, Marty's obviously been a part of the community for a while, and so it's hard to cover sports in this region and not know who Marty Testo is from everything he does.
Yeah, Swamp Bats.
Right.
He's been in Swansea.
And coaching local softball. And
he's been here forever.
Yeah, he coaches his daughter, and he coaches a bunch of the local softball players that play in local high schools and stuff like that. So he's been a mover and shaker in this area for a while, and his name carries a lot of weight. The best hire Keene State could have made. I think hands down, the steps I've seen the college make in terms of putting their best foot forward with the athletic department has been really impressive in the way that it's getting back to, interacting with the community and getting players involved in the community and presenting itself as a, hey, there's stuff to come do. There's stuff to come watch at Keene State. Let's make this a team effort. And I think Marty was the perfect person to kind of bridge those two pieces together because he is such a well-known and well-liked figure around town here. So Marty's awesome. I actually met Coach Testo when I was a high school baseball player myself. One of my high school baseball coaches played baseball at Keene State in the 90s. And so we used to come up every fall and do an overnight and do like a little player showcase camp. And so I met Marty all the way back then.
Wow.
Which was cool. And so, you just got a sense of, here's a guy who loves Keene State, right? Like, I don't think there's a better example of a dude who just lives and breathes this college, right? And it was apparent back then, and it's even more apparent now. So nothing but positive interactions with that guy. I love Marty. He does a great job. And I gave a shout out to Abe for all the help he's given me too. Marty's been a big part of that as well. I mean, the guy in between when I was covering the LEC championship and then I had the D3 high school boys basketball state championship that night, he let me sit in his office to type up the story in between games and stuff like that. So it's, like the guy's willing to help out and do whatever he can to kind of make it a better experience for everybody. So big shout out to Marty.
Well, we're transitioning into spring, and the Owl Athletic Complex becomes quite a busy place. You got baseball, softball, and lacrosse. What does your spring look like covering KSC sports?
That's a good question. I'm still trying to wrap up with winter. So I haven't really, really gotten into my spring plan too much yet. I will say, so normally at the Sentinel, the high schools kind of take a little bit of priority. That's usually the plan I solidify first. I go, okay, how are we going to map out spring preview coverage for all the high schools and then catch up with the colleges from there. Usually the first things I always look for are there any local athletes doing anything big on any of the teams? For example, right at the beginning of winter, I really wanted to do a story on Bryn Radiolo right away.
Of course.
For all the success.
LEC Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, and I think one of the things for the college that is really cool is trying to bring in local kids from local high schools and letting them thrive on a college, scene here. I think that's really cool, and I think it further kind of establishes a relationship between the community and the college, right? So, usually that's kind of one of the first things I'll look for. I'll look for, kids from the area who are doing cool things, and go from there. I'm really interested to see where the steps the baseball team's going to take.
Me too.
I mean, Justin Blood is. I don't think you could have a better coach in Division III.
Agreed.
That's a guy who, probably could be an assistant coach working his way up towards a head coaching position in Division I if he wanted to.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a program that obviously had so much success for so long, for so many years. When I was in high school, Keene State was very much a major player, right? So
it's been quite a drought, though.
Yeah, it's been a drought, and I know the term that Testo always uses that I like to use as well is returning to be the beast of the Little East, right? I love that term; it's great. So, I'm very interested to see in the steps that they're taking over there, and the progress that they're making. With the men's lacrosse program, too. I mean, the first time I was here, they were dominating the Little East every year as well. So, I think in the spring, you're looking at a lot of programs who are trying to get back to some of that past success. And so, I'm looking forward to following how they do on that journey there.
Yeah, so am I. I want to transition into some just more basic sports reporter questions, if you will.
Yeah, definitely.
Considering you're the sports editor for the Sentinel, are you deciding what teams to cover and when?
Yeah, pretty much. So, it's funny. I'm the sports editor. It's a one-man sports department.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I'm the whole sports department. Yeah, it kind of starts and ends with me. Obviously, I have people that I report to.
Sure.
They don't just let me do whatever I want, which is a shame. But yeah, so pretty much, I wish I could say that I had like a super organized plan all the time, and I always knew what I was going to do. I do fly a little bit by the seat of my pants every now and then. But yeah, pretty much everything runs through me in terms of what games I'm going to be going out to, trying to coordinate coverage for stuff I can't get to myself, whether it's hiring freelancers or whatever, getting photo assignments out to our photojournalist, Hannah Schrader, who does an amazing job. Yeah, and then I go and I report it and I write it and I put it on the paper myself. I design the page myself, and we do the whole thing. So it pretty much starts and ends with me, which is a lot of fun, right? It's really cool to kind of take hold of something and call it your own, and be able to kind of grow it and build it. And I came back with a lot of ideas and things that I wanted to do with the sports section that I felt like I had thought about over the years since I had left, and was like, oh, it would have been really cool if I had done this or that. And it's been a lot of fun to kind of take hold of it and just run with it and do what I want. It's been awesome.
So something that's intrigued me is what sort of differences there are in reporting on the different levels of sports. Like, so for example, is covering KSC different than covering KHS because maybe coaches have to bite their lip more at the high school level, or maybe you have to be more careful with what you ask a player in high school than college? I don't know. Anything like that?
Yes and no, right? I kind of run into it sometimes where, sometimes a player will say something, like a high school kid will say that, they'll talk trash in an interview, and I'm like, do I, want to run with that? I mean, it's a 16-year-old, whatever. There's little stuff like that. If anything, I'll say people at the college sometimes are a little bit more professional, and they know how to answer a question that maybe.
That does make sense too.
You know what I mean? It's a little bit more. Yeah, like they know they're a little bit better at the media speak.
Yeah.
It's really not that big of an incident, but it is funny. There was a football coach at Mcmahon who I said was a pro at Belichickian language. Like he would just give me the we're on to the next thing. We just got to do our job. You get a lot of that. But yeah, it's not too different really. Obviously, there are some differences between. Like, there's obviously differences between how you would interview a professional athlete and how you'd interview a high school athlete. But one of the things I enjoy about this job is I kind of try to treat the high school kids like I would the pro kid. Obviously, I don't get on somebody and I don't, hound them over mistakes or anything like that. You're not looking to do that. But, I like to ask good questions. It's a fun part of the job. It's something I'm always trying to get better at. And so I think it is kind of cool, and I think I think the student athletes I cover kind of appreciate that I kind of take that honest approach with them, right? That I'll ask them a question I would ask a Patrice Bergeron or something like that. It's just fun to kind of all treat it the same way. Obviously, having the scope of everything's in context here, right? You're interviewing teenagers and stuff like that. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's a lot of fun, and the student athletes around in this area. Here at the college and at the high schools I cover really do a great job at it. They're always, especially with the high school kids, they're always nervous to get interviewed.
Oh yeah.
They all do great though, which is always really cool. They're always like, oh, that was so bad. And I'm like, no, that was really good actually. So yeah, it's a lot of fun to do those interviews and stuff like that.
So as someone who's invested in sports journalism, I realize that there's no guarantee that I'm going to get to go cover football. That's my favorite sport, or say like D1 basketball, whatever. But I think a place like Keene just proves how exciting the field can be. So what advice would you have for young sports journalists overall?
Cover local sports. Go cover high schools. It's one, the most rewarding sports journalism experience you're going to have. And two, it's the most honest work, right? I honestly think that there's a lot of reporters in the NFL that would be well served to go cover a Friday night football game, to kind of be reminded of the grind it is. You're doing your own stats, right? There's no PR communications department that's going to hand you a stat sheet at the end of the game. If you want to know how many yards the running back had, you got to count the carries, you got to count the yards, you got to walk up and down the sidelines. And then for a paper on a Friday night, depending on, who you work for or whatever, but the Keene Sentinel, we print on Friday night for a Saturday morning paper. So game ends at 9:00. I have to have it. I have to have my story on the page and ready to go to the press by about 10:15. So that means I got to do my post-game interviews. I got to either run, if I'm on the road, I'm going to a McDonald's or anywhere with Wi-Fi, or I'm running back to the office. I'm putting my stats together. I'm typing as fast as I can, and we're getting it out. And I just feel like it is the best adrenaline rush I get from doing this job is those tight deadlines trying to get a game story out. So yeah, my advice to a local, kind of going back to why I started in journalism, why I started on this path was, I wanted to be the next, big columnist or whatever. And when I first started, I really only wanted to write about, I think this about the Bruins and I think this about the Red Sox. And I kind of thought that was, journalism, when really it was, but it was blogging, right? It's go out and cover a local high school football game or a local soccer game, interview, always do interviews, ask questions, get experience doing that stuff. It will serve you well. And I just feel it's the most rewarding too, right? You're making a difference to those people that you're covering, right? The local high school running back who probably isn't going to play football after high school. That story, that interview is kind of a big deal to him, right? Brad Marchand doesn't care. He doesn't care what anybody writes about him.
Fair enough.
Those pro athletes, yeah, sure, they might read some stuff, but they ignore the noise. It obviously there's a fan base you're writing for, but it is really cool to see how appreciative people are of the local coverage and stuff like that, and I get a kick out of it. So that would be my biggest advice to anybody coming up in the journalism field is get out there, do something that you might feel you might be a little uncomfortable with. If you don't know anything about field hockey, go cover a field hockey game. Who cares? I barely know anything about field hockey. I've been covering field hockey for years. I learn something new every time I am there, and it's awesome. Just go do it. If you're a little unsure about something or whatever, just go do it. It'll be worth it.
Well, I think that answer and your road to Keene Sentinel story pretty much answer this next question, but I'm still going to ask it. What are your plans as a sports reporter going forward? Are there other plans in the future for Mike Mcmahon, or you want to stay at the Sentinel?
It is a really good question, right? I think for the first time in my life, professionally, I'm not really chasing the next gig anymore, which is awesome, right? Who knows what the future brings. But I came back to Keene to kind of settle into something for a little bit and make a product that I'm proud of and that the people I'm writing about could be proud of too. And it's only been a year, and I feel like I'm well on the way to where I wanted to get with that. So yeah, I don't know. I've only been back a year, right? So there's still a lot of stuff I want to do here. There's still a lot of improvements I think I can make, and a lot of things that we can do to improve the section. I will say I get great support over from the Sentinel. All the way from publisher Tom Ewing down to the editor staff, Annika Clark, Cecily Weisberg, Bill Bilodeau. It's just an amazing group, and the Sentinel. This town is so fortunate to have an independent newspaper that cares about the community and has a publisher that cares about the community. Where pretty much nobody on staff over there ever has to worry about a corporate media shakedown, cuts, or anything like that. It's a really great place to work. It's a great place for young journalists. Our news staff, our news reporters are typically usually on the younger side. They're out of college. They're trying to find their feet in the industry. And the Sentinel's produced some great reporters over there that have gone on and do some really cool things. So I'm really just enjoying being back so far. I'm still kind of in that phase. But yeah, I don't know where we'll go. Who knows? I will say, I've figured out that I want to cover local sports. I don't think I'm ever going to hop on a pro beat or anything like that. I think, those days are kind of past me. But yeah, I will say, two guys I worked for at the Boston Globe, Bob Holmes and Craig Larson. Bob Holmes was the high school sports editor. Craig Larson is now over at the Boston Globe. I worked for them when I was an intern there. And the work that they do, bringing up young journalists, interns who they have cover high school sports and stuff like that, and kind of helping them and molding them into becoming sports writers. And I mean, the people that I worked with over at the Globe, I mean, it's insane what the talent that comes out of that college sports program over there, the internship program. And so that's something I really liked. You know, I could see myself down the road, you know, being somebody who would mentor and try to bring up the next generation of high school sports reporters or sports reporters in general and stuff like that. So yeah, maybe that's way, way, way down the road. Sure. Well, I guess not. I mean, I'm 30 now, so maybe it's not as far down the road as I think it is. But for now, I'm loving being back. I'm just having a blast. I always say, I kind of stole it from Jack Edwards, but I always say, who has more fun than us? And no one's having more fun than me right now. I'm loving it. It's great.
Well, I'm excited to see what you keep doing at the Sentinel. I didn't anticipate this coming up, but before I came here today, I actually changed hats. I was wearing a Texas Longhorns hat.
Oh, were you?
Yes, and I was like, well, you know what? This is a Keene State sports podcast. I'm at Keene State. Maybe I'm not going to, with the Keene reporter, maybe I'm not going to wear my Texas Longhorns hat. But for those who can't see, which is everyone because this is an audio-only podcast, Mike is wearing a Longhorn shirt.
Hook 'em horns, baby. Texas forever.
I love to hear that. Where does that come from?
So, you know, I always liked Texas. I was never like a Texas fan, but, you know, I had a Texas baseball hat when I was a kid or something like that. But my sister, almost 10 years ago now, moved to Austin, Texas. She was in New York City, but she moved to Austin, Texas. And I grew up in Connecticut. And my college football team, when I was like a kid and then through high school, was UConn. I went to high school with their head coach at the time, Randy Etzel. I went to high school with his son, and so I was a really big UConn football fan. We had season tickets. We would always go on Saturday at the Rent. It was awesome. UConn as a program has fallen off a little bit, I think it's safe to say, from those days back. We're a long way away from the Fiesta Bowl in East Hartford, Connecticut. Let's just say that.
Basketball is fine though.
Yeah. So yeah, and I'm still a UConn basketball fan and everything. But yeah, I kind of needed I love college football. I'll watch football on Saturday more than on Sunday probably. But I kind of didn't have a team for a little bit. So when my sister moved to Texas, I was like, oh, I'm all in. And, you know, I love Friday night. I love Friday Night Lights. Nice. So I love like the whole Texas football culture and stuff like that. So yeah, she moved to Texas and I was on the bandwagon right away. Hook 'em horns. Yeah. Well,
it's still go Owls though, but yes, hook 'em horns.
Yes. Hootie hoo, but also hook 'em horns.
Go Owls. So thanks for being here, Mike. Is there anything that you'd like to plug or add before we wrap up?
Oh man. Obviously, go to sentinelsource.com, subscribe, support local journalism, also support local sports. Go to a high school sports game, man. It's awesome. You know, the kids in this area don't get a lot of shine in the state. I feel like all the focus is always on, you know, Seacoast and those kind of areas and the Concord and Manchester areas. The kids out here grind, and it's awesome, and I love it. And like I said earlier, for college basketball, This is it in New Hampshire. This is the best spot to come watch college hoops. Get out to a local sports game. Yeah, that would be my message, especially to Keene State kids. You know, it's a really cool environment I think you guys have here, and a really cool opportunity to. Yeah, it's not major college sports, but being at Spalding when it's hopping is cool, man. It's a lot of fun, and you know, you guys get loud behind me there I'm always at the media table, and you know, I can always feel you guys kind of bearing down on me, and it's awesome. I love it.
All right, well, thanks again for being here, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I appreciate it, man.
Looking ahead for the Owls after tonight's Sweet 16 game, let's hope us fans back home are going to be treated to some more Owls basketball in the round of 8. The baseball team remains on the road for a doubleheader Sunday against St. Joseph's. The women's lacrosse team is at home Saturday against Emmanuel. It's the last week of esports, with each game having one more matchup, each starting on Tuesday and going through Thursday. And that does it for this week's Owls Overtime. I'd just like to thank Mike Mcmahon again for coming on the show. It was a great interview. Be sure to tune in to next week's Owls Overtime.